"If you keep looking at me like that," she said, not even turning from the counter. I should have looked away. I didn't. The line had slipped out of her so casually, like she wasn't expecting me to answer, like it was just a thought aloud. But I did answer, half under my breath. "Then stop being so beautiful." And now, hours later, I can still hear it echoing in my head. The sound of my own voice saying something I shouldn't have, the way her shoulders tensed, the pause she held before pretending not to hear me. I work in a small, half-forgotten bookstore wedged between a laundromat and a locksmith. The kind of place with creaky wooden floors, dusty sunlight, and too many handwritten staff recommendations that no one reads. Most afternoons pass quietly, the soft click of the ceiling fan, the faint smell of paper and glue. That was where she walked in. She didn't glide or stumble or make any kind of entrance. She just was. A woman in her 40s, maybe mid-40s, though she carried herself like someone who knew better than to apologize for age. Dark hair pinned up, a charcoal blazer over a plain white blouse. Not trying to impress, but somehow she did. She asked me where the poetry section was, her voice low, unhurried, the kind that makes you listen even if you don't care about the words. I pointed, but I couldn't stop watching her as she walked. Not in a clumsy, obvious way, but the way you can't stop staring at a painting you know you'll never afford. She noticed. Of course she did. When she pulled a book from the shelf, she didn't open it. She just stood there with it resting in her hand, flipping the pages with her thumb, glancing up once, too quickly, too directly. That was when she said it. "If you keep looking at me like that," it wasn't sharp. It wasn't playful. More like she was reminding herself out loud that someone was watching. My reply, the reckless, quiet thing I whispered, surprised even me. Maybe I thought she wouldn't hear. Maybe I wanted her to. "Then stop being so beautiful." There was no laugh, no clever comeback. Just that pause, long enough to sting, before she set the book back and moved down the aisle as though nothing had happened. But I felt it. The air between us shifted. The ceiling fan sounded too loud, the space too small. Every breath seemed like it might give me away. I spent the next 20 minutes pretending to rearrange the front display. She browsed, deliberate, touching the spines of books like she was listening to them. Not rushing, not leaving, just existing in the same silence as me. At one point, she brought a book to the counter, a thin volume of Adrian Rich poems. She didn't hand it over right away. She placed it between us, her fingers resting on the cover, almost like she wasn't done with it. Her nails were unpolished, her hands steady. "You read?" she asked. Simple question, but her eyes lingered a second too long, as though she already knew the answer. "Sometimes," I said, though my throat felt dry. She nodded once, then finally released the book for me to ring up. A small smile tugged at her mouth, not quite reaching her eyes. When she left, the little brass bell above the door chimed, and the silence that followed was heavier than before. I should have gone back to shelving, sweeping, anything. But I stood there, staring at the space she had just walked through, feeling the weight of words I shouldn't have said. And yet, I can't stop wondering why she didn't correct me, why she didn't leave sooner, why her silence feels more alive than anyone else's conversation. She came back 3 days later. Not that I'd been watching the door. Not that I'd rearranged the same shelf 3 times just to stay busy. But when the bell over the entrance chimed and I saw her, the same charcoal blazer, though today with a soft scarf looped around her neck, I felt that same quiet electricity humming under my skin. She was carrying a tote bag, heavier than it looked. When she shifted it off her shoulder to adjust, a book slipped out, falling flat on the floor. I moved faster than I meant to, bending to pick it up. Our hands almost met on the cover. She pulled back a little too quickly, like the brief brush might have been a mistake. "Thank you," she said, straightening. Her voice was polite, distant, as though she decided in advance that kindness was safer than closeness. "No problem." I tried to keep it casual, but I noticed her hand lingered just a second longer on the strap of the bag. Her knuckles were pale, the skin around them faintly tired, like she carried more weight than paper. She asked about a shipment of new titles, not poetry this time, but history. Her tone was matter of fact, but she didn't meet my eyes until I gave her the answer. And when she finally did, It was quick, like light glancing off glass before retreating. We walked the aisles together, me pointing out where the new stock was stacked. She didn't really need my help. She knew her way around already. But she let me anyway. And in that quiet, I started to notice things I hadn't before. The way her laugh, short, almost accidental, slipped out when a stack of books leaned too far, nearly toppling. The faint shadows under her eyes that powder couldn't hide. How she smoothed the edge of her scarf twice in a row, as if keeping her hands busy meant keeping herself composed. She crouched once, pulling a book from a lower shelf. When she rose, she caught herself against the wood, just a fraction unsteady. I pretended not to notice, but my chest tightened in a way I didn't expect. She wasn't fragile, not at all, but she was tired. And I wondered who else ever noticed that about her. When she brought 2 books to the counter, there was a moment, too quick to name, where she hesitated before letting go of them. Her fingers lingered on the hardcovers, just like last time, as if she didn't want the exchange to end. "You're always here?" she asked, almost idly. "Mostly," I said. She nodded, but her eyes didn't match the sound. Something flickered there, like she wanted to say more, then thought better of it. As she turned to leave, she paused halfway to the door, one hand on the scarf at her throat. She looked back at me. Not long, just long enough. And in that pause, in the silence that stretched a little too far, it felt like the room itself leaned closer. The storm started just before closing, the kind that rattled the windows and made the street lamps flicker like they were unsure if they belonged in the dark. I was stacking the last of the returns when the door creaked open, and there she was, hair damp at the edges, scarf pulled tighter against her throat. "You're still open?" she asked, a half smile like she already knew the answer. "Not really," I said. "But come in." She did. She shook the rain from her coat, drops pattering onto the worn floorboards, and for a moment the shop felt smaller. The storm pressed everything closer, the shelves, the air, the 2 of us. She drifted toward the poetry section again, though I could tell she wasn't really looking. Her hand skimmed along the spines without stopping. I followed, more out of instinct than duty, the silence between us louder than the storm outside. At one point, she glanced over her shoulder. "Do you ever feel like books notice who touches them?" The question caught me, not because of what it meant, but because of the way she asked it, soft, almost self-mocking, like she didn't mean to say it out loud. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Like they keep track." Her mouth curved, not a smile, exactly, but something close. She turned back to the shelves, resting her hand on one book as though the answer might be written in the grain of the paper. There was a moment then, close enough that I noticed the faint scent of rain on her clothes, the tired warmth in her eyes when she finally looked at me. My chest pulled tight, words on the edge of forming. I wanted to tell her something. Not love, not even attraction, just that she felt like the only one awake in a world half asleep. But before I could, her phone buzzed. The sound broke everything. She froze, glancing down at the screen. Her expression shifted, subtle, but sharp, like shutters closing. She didn't answer. She silenced it, slipped the phone back into her bag, and cleared her throat. "Sorry," she said, though she wasn't looking at me anymore. "It's fine," I murmured, though my jaw was tight. The storm cracked outside, thunder rolling deep. The lights flickered once, twice. And when they steadied again, she was standing a little too close. Not deliberate, maybe, but close enough that the fabric of her coat brushed my sleeve. Neither of us moved. Her hand lifted, almost without thought, adjusting the scarf at her collar. For an instant, I thought she might reach further, touch my arm, my shoulder, something. Instead, she dropped her hand, stepped back, exhaled. "I should go before it gets worse," she said, though the storm was already at its peak. I nodded, even as every part of me wanted to say, "Stay." The bell over the door chimed again, sharp against the rain. And I stood there, staring at the space she'd left behind, my fingers still tingling from a touch that never happened. It happened on a Tuesday. Ordinary, quiet, almost dull. She came in after work. I could tell by the sharp crease of her blouse, the way her hair had loosened from its morning arrangement. She didn't look like she'd planned to stop here. I was unpacking a shipment in the back when she found me. The storeroom light was dim, the boxes half open, paper crumpled across the floor. She stepped inside without asking, her presence filling the space like another heartbeat. "Busy?" she asked. "Not really." She leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching me slice through tape with a box cutter. The silence stretched too long. Normally she would fill it with some question about books, but this time, nothing. Finally, she said it. Low, almost hesitant. "What are we doing?" The knife stopped in my hand. My pulse thudded louder than the storm had. I didn't look at her right away. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I knew. Her arms tightened across her chest. "You know what I mean." The air shifted, heavy, suffocating. I set the knife down, turned to face her. She was watching me, steady, but I could see the flicker of something behind her eyes. Confusion. Fear. A kind of ache I didn't know how to name. "We're just—" I started, but the words dried up. "Just what? Just talking? Just standing too close in empty rooms? Just not saying what we both felt pressing at the edges?" She exhaled through her nose, a sound almost like a laugh, except there was nothing amused in it. "This isn't normal." Her gaze pinned me. I couldn't look away, not even to breathe. My throat tightened. "I don't want it to be normal." That broke something. A crease formed between her brows, her lips parting like I'd struck too close. She looked down, away, shaking her head as though trying to gather herself. "You're too young," she whispered, almost to herself. "And you're too what?" I asked. My voice came out harsher than I meant. "Too alive? Too much for me." Because that's not true. The silence after that was unbearable. She bit her lip, hand twitching like she wanted to reach for something. A shelf, the door, maybe even me, but stopped. I took one step closer. Not enough to touch, but enough that the warmth between us was undeniable. She raised her eyes again, and for a moment, we just stared, breathing unevenly in the half-light. Her composure cracked, the faintest tremor in her voice when she finally said, "I can't afford to need someone who might leave before I'm ready." The words hit harder than any touch. My chest ached, my hands useless at my sides. I wanted to answer, to promise something I couldn't. Instead, I stood there in the silence, knowing everything had changed, because she'd finally said what we both had been avoiding. The storm had passed, but the silence between us hadn't. For days after that night in the storeroom, I couldn't stop replaying her words. "I can't afford to need someone who might leave before I'm ready." She didn't come by for almost a week. I told myself I'd stop looking for her, that it didn't matter, but every time the bell over the shop door chimed, my stomach still pulled tight, hoping. Then, one late afternoon, she finally walked in. No scarf, no blazer, just a loose sweater, her hair unpinned, softer somehow. Tired, but human. She didn't browse. She went straight to the counter, placed her phone face down on it. The gesture alone felt strange, like she was putting something heavy between us. "I shouldn't be here," she said quietly. The words should have stung, but her tone wasn't sharp. It was weary. I leaned on the counter, searching her face. "Then why are you?" She didn't answer right away. Her hand hovered over the phone, fingers restless against the edge. Then, almost reluctantly, she pushed it toward me. "It's easier if you just hear it." The voicemail was already queued up. I hesitated, but the look in her eyes told me she wanted me to. So I pressed play. Her phone speaker crackled. A man's voice filled the small space, low and rough with emotion. "Claire, please. I know I ruined it. I know I lost you. But I can't. I can't stand the silence anymore. Just call me back." The message ended. The shop felt unbearably still. She didn't explain, didn't even look at me, just stared down at her hands clasped on the counter, knuckles white. I swallowed hard. "That was my ex-husband," she cut in, steady but brittle. 2 years gone, and he still thinks I'll answer. I didn't know what to say. Every instinct told me to comfort her, but I stayed quiet, waiting. Finally, she lifted her eyes to mine, and the look there knocked the air out of me. Vulnerable, yes, but also searching, like she needed to know whether I would flinch now that I'd seen the cracks. "You remind me of someone," she whispered. "Not him. Someone before. Someone I loved when I was young enough to think love fixed everything." Her voice shook then, just barely, before she caught herself. And that terrifies me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The ground between us had shifted, and I hadn't seen it coming. She pulled the phone back, slipped it into her bag. For a second, her hand lingered there, resting on the worn leather, her body angled as though she might walk away again. But she didn't. Instead, she looked at me one last time, her eyes raw, unguarded, and said softly, "Don't make me believe in something I can't survive losing twice." She didn't come back the next day, or the one after. By the third, I'd convinced myself that the voicemail had sealed it, that I'd been a temporary shadow she stepped into when it felt safe, but one she could just as easily step out of. Then, on a Friday evening, just before closing, the bell chimed. She didn't speak when she entered. She looked undone, hair loose, jacket draped over one arm, eyes rimmed in the faint red of someone who hadn't slept enough. She carried no books, no bag, just herself. I didn't ask anything. I only locked the front door behind her, flipping the sign to closed. For a long time, neither of us moved. The shop hummed with the faint buzz of the fluorescent light, the smell of paper and dust thick between us. Finally, she exhaled. "I'm so tired of being careful." The words weren't for me exactly. More like an admission she couldn't hold anymore. I stepped closer, but not all the way. "So don't be." Her laugh was short, cracked at the edges. "It's not that simple." "Maybe it is," I said quietly. She looked up then, and whatever guard she usually carried, the tidy armor of composure, the carefully measured distance, it was gone. Her eyes were raw, stripped of everything except the truth. She was scared, and she wanted. I didn't rush. I didn't reach for her. I just stood there, waiting. When she finally moved, it wasn't dramatic. She walked over slowly, stopping just close enough that I could feel the heat of her breath. She didn't touch me, but she didn't step back either. "This shouldn't," she started, but the sentence collapsed. She closed her eyes, shaking her head. "God, I don't even know what this is." I whispered, "Neither do I." And that was the most honest thing I'd ever said. Something broke then, not in a violent way, but like a dam quietly giving up. Her hand trembled once before she set it on the counter beside mine. Not touching, just near. I turned my palms slightly, brushing the back of her fingers. That was all. That was everything. We stood like that for what felt like hours. No declarations, no promises, just the shared weight of silence. Her breathing slowed, steadied, almost in rhythm with mine. At one point, she leaned the smallest fraction closer, her forehead nearly against mine. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't even a choice. It was gravity. We stayed there, suspended, fragile, inevitable, until the lights above us flickered once, reminding us the night was deep and the world still turning. She finally whispered, not looking at me, but not moving away either. "Whatever this is, let's not name it." "Not yet." I nodded, and in that moment, it didn't matter what it was called. It was enough. It's strange, looking back now, how the whole thing never really had a clear beginning. There was no first date, no agreed-upon moment when we crossed a line. Just glances that lingered too long, words spoken softer than they should have been, silences that carried more weight than conversations. And maybe that's the truth of it. Love, or whatever name we choose for it, doesn't always arrive like a declaration. Sometimes it grows quietly in the places you don't expect, until suddenly you realize you can't imagine the room without it. She taught me that, without ever meaning to. When I first met her, I thought it was attraction, fascination, the thrill of noticing someone I wasn't supposed to notice. But it became something else, heavier, quieter. The way I started to see not just her smile, but the tiredness behind it. Not just her strength, but the parts she tried to hide. And the way she let me be there in those spaces, even when she swore she didn't need anyone. I think she changed too, though she'd never admit it out loud. She stopped bracing so hard against being seen. She let herself laugh a little easier, sit a little longer in the silence without rushing to fill it. And once, when we were sitting side by side on the floor of the shop after a long night, she told me she hadn't realized how lonely she'd been until I stopped letting her be. I didn't answer. I just stayed. Sometimes that's enough. The truth is, it was never about an age gap or rules, or right and wrong. It was about two people who recognized something familiar in each other's shadows, regret meeting longing, fear meeting hope, and deciding, even just for a moment, not to look away. We didn't solve each other. We didn't promise forever. But we made space, and in that space we found something worth holding. And that's what I carry with me now. That sometimes the most important love isn't the one that lasts forever. It's the one that changes you so deeply that forever looks different afterward. So when people ask me if it was worth it, if the late nights and unspoken words and blurred boundaries meant anything in the end, I think about her hand resting near mine on the counter, neither of us daring to move it away. I think about how silence with her never felt empty. And I always answer the same way, yes, because it taught me how to see. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, I'd love to know, has someone ever surprised you just by seeing you? Leave your thoughts below.